and BioNTech are quite encouraging because essentially those RNA vaccines, they do the same thing as the DNA vaccines or the vector solutions. Why? Because they essentially present the spike protein to the immune system. One way is to actually bring it to the immune system. The other one is to have it produced internally, which is the RNA. So it means that in principle, if you elicit an immune response against the spike protein, you are clinically protective. So any solution which actually brings a response against the spike protein is protective. So it's actually not only good news for the RNA vaccines, it's good news for all the vaccines.
Okay.
Which is very, very encouraging. And from the public health perspective, it is very encouraging. Now, of course, all the vaccines are in the clinic. We know that they're protective in animals because we've been doing a host of preclinical studies, and we know they're highly immunogenic in humans because we've been doing phase 1 and phase 2. So again, this is, of course, it's very good news for Pfizer and BioNTech, although it's a 2-dose vaccine and it has to be stored at -70.
That's very difficult to keep it.
A nightmare. So some countries have already said they will. It's not workable. It's not workable for them. And even in the US, it's going to be very, very complex. Pfizer is coming up with a special solution with a cooler box. That cooler box can be opened only for 1 minute at a time and only twice a day.
Yeah, it is. Oh, yeah.
To go to some remote places. So it's very, very, very impractical. Very impractical. So I think it is good for science because it's advancing science. It's promising. It can legitimately make public health authorities dream about a solution, but let's face it, it is not. It is not.
Okay. At least we know that it exists.
Yeah.
Okay, and did you hear about the Russian vaccine that they say that if Pfizer's vaccine is 90% efficient, ours is 92 or 93% efficient? Did you read that news?
Yeah, I read that news. But I think this to me is meaningless because saying it's 92 versus 90 is absolutely meaningless.
Okay. It doesn't mean anything.
So the thing which is interesting is it in the 70% range, in the 80, in the 90% range? That's what is interesting. And again, that's what I was telling you. I'm not surprised that the Russian vaccine is in the 90% range. Why? The Russian vaccine is a 2-dose vaccine. The first dose is an adeno 26, which is the same technology as the Johnson & Johnson technology, which is a 1-dose vaccine. And the second dose is an adeno 5, which is the same technology as CanSino, which is also a 1-dose vaccine. And in both instances, the Russian Institute, Gamaleya, they use a very loaded formulation, lots of antigen, 5 times the amount of antigen that J&J and CanSino respectively are using. So you're looking at something which essentially hyper-stimulates the immune system. So by definition, it is effective. It must have a pretty lousy side effect profile. That's a different question. But from the efficacy perspective, yes. I told it. Where people are telling me, "Oh, but this is Russian technology will not work." Say bullshit. The Russians have very good vaccine companies.
Yes, definitely. So it is a cocktail of vaccines. The Russian ones is a cocktail.
Actually, the Russian one is actually 2 doses based on 2 different technologies.
Okay, with 2 different technologies. Okay, so good. Let's begin with the question. One of the questions that I ask you. One more general question: how vaccines are designed? Because we hear that there are different technologies used for COVID vaccine. How vaccines are designed? If you can tell us briefly.
I'm sorry. I'm getting one emergency out of the way, and then I'll ask you to repeat the question.
Okay.
Because I'm telling you, the world is working all the time, and now I'm trying to deal with, cross-border politics between in this vaccine thing. So, I'm just getting this very short WeChat message out of the way.
There are so many different technologies used for producing, for manufacturing, and developing
Okay.
COVID vaccine. Why they are so different?
Okay, well, I think first of all, each company is trying to work with the technology that it has a good command of. So
Mm-hmm.
the reason for having so many technologies is that each company has a technical forte, if you will, and they use the technology that they're comfortable with or they're skilled with. Some of those technologies are very ancient technology. Like the two Chinese companies, Sinovac and Sinopharm, they use inactivated virus. So what is inactivated virus is you grow the virus into biofermenters, meaning you have to have biocontainment because you don't want this to leak out, okay? And then you kill the virus, and you kill it in such a way that it does not alter the spike protein, and you administer that killed virus. And of course, it is not replicated, so it's not triggering the disease, but it is presenting the spike protein, so it elicits the immune response. All the other technologies are not using the virus itself. So they're producing or getting to the production of the spike protein using the information, the genetic information of the virus. The Chinese authorities have been publishing the sequencing of the virus. And with that sequencing, some companies have been doing either an RNA or a DNA or a viral vector, which encodes, in which you encode the production of the protein so that the protein is expressed at the surface of this viral vector. So essentially, it's either old technology, inactivated virus, or it's the understanding of the genetic coding of the spike protein, and then you use different methods to express the protein.
But are all those old old technologies can be still used for something that's unknown, such as
Yes,
coronavirus?
of course, by definition.
So if the older technologies are still today available and we can use them, why do we need to the new technologies like gene sequencing,
Well, that's a
everything?
good question. Well, I mean, first of all, the old technologies have several limitations. The first thing is you start from the pathogen itself. Okay, and the problem with the pathogen is that it is pathogenic. So you have to, control the production and make sure that there's no leakage, that your staff is not contaminated, and that there's no leakage to the environment. That's the first main limitation. The second limitation is that if you don't want to work with the virus itself, you have to have a kind of an industrial version strain that is actually maybe less pathogenic, but still has the same characteristic of the spike protein, which is very difficult to get. And third, for a virus, you need a cell line. Viruses don't grow like bacteria, where you put water, amino acids, sugar, and they grow easily. What you need for a virus, you need a cell line. You need to grow them in a cell line. So you need to adapt the virus to a cell line. And it's a relatively complex process. The other also problem with those classical methods is oftentimes they need to scale up. They need large facilities, and those are expensive, and the scale up takes time. So the beauty of the other technologies is you don't have the similar need for cell lines, a dedicated cell line for a viral strain. You don't have the need for biocontainment. And typically you have faster production cycles.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I have read that there are a good number of startups that are working on a COVID vaccine project.
Yes.
I do not know how a startup can have, enough resources to work on such a big project. and what they can do, in the middle of those giants who are like GSK, like Pfizer, like Johnson and Johnson, what they can bring more, that's my question, first of all.
Okay, well, so there are two questions in your question.
Yes.
One is how can they work,
Yes.
and the other is what can they bring.
Yes.
So how can they work? It's all a matter of fundraising.
Okay.
So if they have an interesting value proposition, finding money today to fund a COVID-19 project is super easy. There's tons of public money.
Okay.
Arguably, lots of money was directed towards finding a solution in the first half of 2020. As soon as some phase 2 results became available for the front runners, the shift of the public money or the NGO money went more towards, okay, let's make sure we can produce in sufficient quantities. And maybe there was a bit less money going to early stage projects. Why? Because they were credible projects that were more advanced. And the fact that actually Pfizer had this, or Pfizer, actually BioNTech had this news, and for the reason I explained before, is actually bad news for the early stage companies, because it means, we have a solution. So maybe there's less need to invest right now in a new solution, especially because the bar is already quite high. If you have 90% efficacy with the technology that are available today, why would you actually worry? Okay, so I think those results and the results that will come in the coming, I would say, months, are going to do two things for the startups. One is they will actually complicate their value proposition because they set the bar very high, and they will reduce the appetite of the external fund providers to fund those companies. But at the same time, it will facilitate their work. Why? Because you will have an established correlation between a level of immune response and clinical protection, which the frontrunners didn't have. When you go after a new pathogen, you don't know if the immune response that you see in phase 2 is going to be clinically protective. But when this correlation has been established, for any latecomer, they can refer to this level. Oh, I get this level of antibodies measured with that method. I get this level of cellular response. Therefore, I should be protective.
Okay, so that's how startups can bring their knowledge.
Well, this is how they could actually have a shorter and less expensive route to bringing a solution to market. But again, the bar is now very high.
Okay. And do you think that because there are a good number of startups, that increasingly they are working on COVID project, do you think that after COVID pandemic, they can still have enough responsibility, enough missions to work about for producing other vaccines, or no, their mission just stopped at the end of the pandemic?
No, well, actually, it depends on what was the reason that drove those companies to develop a COVID-19 solution. For some companies, it's only an alibi to demonstrate the value of the technology.
Definitely.
So they get some money from outside, free money, non-dilutive money. They establish the value of their technology and their platform. If they don't make a business out of COVID-19, it may not be a problem for them. Some of them only want to demonstrate the value of their platform, and then they apply the platform to other targets. Remember, there's no approved product for RNA today. It's been tried in cancer. It is evolving slowly in cancer. It is tried, but it's still in clinical development for infectious diseases like CMV, for instance, cytomegalovirus. But it has never been approved. There's no medical product or vaccine approved today based on RNA and registered and used in routine. So in a way, it is for RNA as well. It's an acceleration, if you will, of the access to market by demonstrating the value of the technology. That's what it does.
Okay, thank you. If I understood very well what you said, I think that still these startups that are working on vaccines and immunotherapy, maybe their business model is still not really sustainable. and they should probably
Well,
develop.
by definition, not every startup survives. Okay, but when you're a startupper, an entrepreneur, or an investor in a startup company, what do you want? You want to make a multiple out of your investment.
Sure.
Whether the company, and you have several ways to make it, either the company survives and generates, flies with its own wings, or you sell the company. That's also a way to make an exit. And they don't necessarily have to survive to make a return on their investment.
Yes.
So yes, the vast majority will disappear. Some will disappear because they will fail. Some will disappear because they will go dry in terms of cash. But some will disappear simply because they're happily selling their assets to a big one and then move on to something else.
I think that's the last one that you mentioned is a sad one. It shows that their motivation is not, it doesn't go beyond the pandemic or beyond the innovation, it's not
Well,
sustainable
you
motivation.
can't. I mean, not everybody wants to become GSK or Pfizer. Right. Besides, I think it is an illusion to think when you're at a startup level that you become such a big company. But if you manage to generate a technology which is attractive enough for a larger entity, which has the financial means to grow your platform in several applications, that's success as well. That's your invention coming to life and bringing a solution to patients.
Mhm.
So it's not so bad. Okay, it's not a standalone entity anymore, but
Okay. No, because I think that in general public, even at academic level, we hope that at least these startups that are working on healthcare and healthcare technology, on vaccine projects, they have more scientific, novel, motivations that go beyond, just making money or surviving for a while or getting rich and then switching to another thing. That's why I think that is somehow disappointing.
well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I think all the entrepreneurs that actually nurture technology and try to develop it, they have a vision about what this technology can bring. Especially when the entrepreneurs are themselves formerly from the academic world and essentially transition from the academic world into the entrepreneur world. Um, I agree with you that I absolutely don't trust the CEOs of startup companies who are guys that come from the finance sector and just smell a good idea and they just do it for. I like to be working with startup companies where you have either the CEO or the CSO who's a true scientific mind and have a commitment
Mhm.
to delivering value for mankind, for science. But in most instances, it is the case.
Okay.
In most instances, it is the case. Again, it's just that at times it's a combination of, timing, competition, maybe design of experiment, and they make the wrong choices, and therefore they fail to demonstrate, and they burn too much cash in the wrong way. There are several reasons for failure. At times, it's simply because the science is not solid, and the original assumption is not flying. But there are other, and to me that's the sad part. The sad part is that there are other reasons than the quality of the science itself that explain why companies fail, and in this to me is the sad part, because it is essentially, yeah, oh well, your technology is very good, but you failed because you've been a poor manager, or you've not been managing your cash properly, or you've not been able to hire the right people, or you've not been able to run your experiments in the right way. And this is sad. That's, I agree, is value which is wasted.
Definitely, definitely. So if you want to compare a little bit the characteristics, are all of these giants that are working on vaccine projects, COVID vaccine or other vaccine in general nowadays in the world, do they have common characteristics, or we cannot identify them based upon their characteristics? They're very different.
Well, pretty much all of them are present in the field of vaccines already.
Okay, so they have a background. They have
Yeah,
a
well, I mean,
background.
Sanofi has Sanofi Pasteur, GSK has vaccines. That's very clear. Pfizer, of course, they had vaccines since the acquisition of Wyeth. J&J, they acquired Crucell, so
Mm.
it's much smaller, but they are in vaccines. Um, uh, and AstraZeneca, they still own MedImmune. And MedImmune originally was a company that was making intranasal influenza vaccine, and they transitioned away from infectious diseases into cancer immunotherapy. But it's still about stimulating the immune system to get an immune response. So all those companies have a commitment to immunotherapy, or whether active or passive.
Okay, so why Sanofi is not as fast as the others?
That is a pretty good question.
No, I had thought maybe the technology they are using, the project that's defined is different. Maybe I do not know the the
Well,
process.
I think they're using the project is to use a recombinant protein.
Okay.
I think it is a recombinant protein. But I mean, you can check this. If you go to the WHO website and you look at the list of projects, you have by phase the list of projects. It's updated regularly, and you look at the GSK Sanofi project, and it will tell you which technology it is.
Yes. Okay. So we do not know why they are not as fast as Pfizer, for example.
No, well, I think I mean, remember, Pfizer is not their technology.
Mm.
It's
Okay.
not their technology. It's the technology of a German company called
Yes.
BioNTech.
The small one. Yeah.
Pfizer has no scientific input in there. It's just the commercial and medical clinical operations muscle.
And manufacturing, I
And
think.
we have manufacturing, finance, commercialization, etc. But the technology, it's not their invention.
Okay.
Same thing for AstraZeneca.
Mm-hmm.
AstraZeneca knows nothing about the technology. They
Oxford.
all come
It's
from Oxford.
Oxford University. Okay. Okay. That's good. That's very good. Okay. So I want to ask this question. What's the value creation of vaccine companies? The startups and the giants. What's the
Okay.
value they create?
Yeah, when you look at the history of vaccines in general terms, it is now demonstrated that there's no medical intervention that has been more productive to preserve human life
Mm.
than vaccines.
Mhm.
The only thing that has been more efficient in general terms, not even a medical intervention, was access to clean water.
Okay.
So the cost effectiveness of vaccine is enormous.
Enormous.
And it is going to be demonstrated
Mhm.
big time in this current situation. I mean, you look at the actual economic impact of the pandemic itself, just getting out of there signals the value of the vaccine. No question.
Definitely.
It's a fantastic health economic case study.
Yes, sure, for sure. I think the role of health economic is changing nowadays because all of these questions about cost effectiveness, everything. So I think that in a very near future, health economics might evolve a lot. There are a lot of problems that they have to solve. Another question, we always think that those who are working in a vaccine company, either in a startup or in a big company, they might be aware of the value they are creating and how they are demonstrating this value, how they are capturing this value. But in reality, are the professionals who are working in a company, they are aware of what they are doing, or no? This is their job and they're doing without thinking about how we should demonstrate our value. That's what's expected in the modern business model science or methodology. It is supposed that the company should be capable. This is one of the capabilities that may guarantee the sustainability of a company. If you can demonstrate your value proposition, and if you can capture this value later, this is the third stage. But my personal impression, that when you talk with the professionals, either in vaccine company or in pharmaceuticals, they are not aware of what is the value of their job, what they're producing, what's the value of their products and services, and how this can be demonstrated, this can be communicated, and how value can be captured. That's why you can say that probably they're not really aware of what's the business model at all, from those point of view. I would like to ask you, have you ever heard during their discussions with professionals that they mention importance of the value propositions of their products and services, or are they, worried about their business model, how we can provide, how we can guarantee the sustainability of our model, what we can bring more next, what's the next step? Are
Yeah,
they?
well, you always discuss that in startup companies. It's a discussion which takes place at the board level, and it takes place, with the CEO, and it takes place also every time you raise money, when you approach investors. Um, and I mean, why is that? Is that when you look at the OECD countries, healthcare, globally speaking, represents roughly 10% of the GDP. So 10% of the real economy is healthcare. I mean, this is public data. It's OECD data. So nowadays, it is not possible to bring a new innovation and expect people to pay if you don't demonstrate two things. First is the medical value of the technology, and second thing is the economic benefit derived from it. Mm-hmm. When you look at the process for adoption of medical innovation, medications, prevention, medtech, whatever, you first demonstrate that it works technically, so it's efficacy, safety, whatever, which means it is medically okay, it works. It doesn't mean that it is economically okay. And then you have to fit into an ecosystem, and then they're all different, and of course, and the way to pay for and how the value that the authorities or the payers are putting on the technology is different. So today, for any startup company in the field of life science, and of course, in the case of vaccines as well, but in general terms that applies to life science, you have to demonstrate that your technology is sound, meaning I deliver a response. So it's either a positive efficacy safety ratio. It is, if it's in vitro diagnostic, it is sensitive and specific, and so on and so forth. And then you have to demonstrate that when it is used, it generates an economic surplus. Short of that, nobody buys your stuff. Okay, and this is where at times some technologies fail. Why? Because they are too complex to be used, because they're too expensive to be used, or because the entrepreneurs are too greedy and they want to extract too much value, and the market is not just there at this level of expectation. So, but again, it is not different for any startup company in life science. That logic applies to everyone.
Okay, that's great. I have two important questions. I had a course this month. Since 3 months, I am teaching, and I have finished it this week. It's about the post-crisis business models, reinventing the post-crisis business models. So we have had the cases of life science companies and startups, and there has been a very good article published about the category of those business models who survived during the pandemic, and they will survive after pandemic. There are 6 categories of anti-fragile business models: robust, adapted business models, retired business models, aided business models, something like that. I think that in the case of many startups, they can be considered either after pandemic retired. They will be retired after the project, or they may adopt their business model. They have to define a new project. Another thing that was about the importance of digitalization of the companies. Those companies who are digitalized, they can better survive during, let's say, any pandemic, any crisis of that kind. I would like to know if the vaccine companies who are working about COVID vaccine, do they have any project for giving more public education to people, creating those spaces for online teaching about education about the vaccine so that there will be a better acceptance from people for COVID vaccine or any other vaccine. Also, many of companies, they have created their own applications. So if you're vaccinated, let's say, you can be followed by a doctor, by a nurse. So you can send your data, you can communicate in real time your data. So they can have a better knowledge about the side effects, possible side effects, or they can control the side effects or any risk factors. Are they in parallel working on such projects? Because I think this can bring a lot of value for the vaccine company, and people will be more open to accept their propositions in the future, right now and in the future.
But evidently, what you just described, which is the interface with the market and with the end users, of course, is important. I think you need to look at the entire value chain of the companies. If you look at established vaccine companies, for instance, and there we already have seen several papers on this evolution, also prompted by the analysis of how the companies have been finding ways to navigate the crisis. When you look at the impact on research and development, you've seen obstacles to access CROs that do preclinical work. Because when you want to work, for instance, to do a challenge study with a virus, which is there's no treatment, no known treatment for it, you can't do it, like in the open. So you have very special containment rules, and there were few CROs doing this. So for some companies, accessing the facilities to do animal studies was a problem. Second aspect is clinical studies. I mean, clinical studies, when you have healthy subjects in the case of vaccines, or if you do oncology studies and you have patients who are immunocompromised or immunosuppressed, you're not going to bring them into hospital facilities where you have the risk of contamination. So having a more delocalized model to execute the clinical trials, remote monitoring, rather than bringing the patient over to the hospital, is sending a nurse to the patient. If there's some special examinations, like medical imaging, send them to private facilities where there are not otherwise hospitalized contagious patients. But the execution model of the clinical development has been impacted, clearly. Manufacturing is also impacted. I think we've seen the impact on the value chain of this situation. I mean, right now, the situation has demonstrated that the supply chains are extremely fragile. Why? Because manufacturing was going towards a small number of very large factories that would serve the whole world, which is a good way to make economies of scale, there's no question. But the day you've got a problem in one of those factories, or the day the supply chain, the air freight or the train or whatever, the ground freight doesn't work, you're stuck. So the new model is going to be maybe more smaller facilities disseminated around the world. And also there are new manufacturing technologies that allow a simpler and more cost-efficient business model, where you would have more production units close to the densely populated areas, where also you need to have also the personnel that had the right skills, of course. But so you're less dependent on only one facility. So we're going to see this as an evolution. From the regulatory perspective, you're also seeing an evolution. You're seeing the authorities being more open to rolling submissions, being, rather than waiting for the whole dossier to be submitted, and being more agile and having a more, I would say, dynamic interaction with the companies. And lastly, at the commercialization level, supply chain again being a problem. I just mentioned this with the manufacturing point, and then also engaging with your end users. In the specific case of vaccines, I think we have a big problem where there is a growing anti-vaccine sentiment, which is fueled by all sorts of unsubstantiated stories, But you can't actually prevent this so much because most people don't understand what is the vaccine science. Um, they have the impression that they're being lied to by politicians, by the press, by everybody. So it is, and they don't have, most of them, the ability to distinguish true from fake news. So anything that resonates with them, they
Mm,
take it as face value. They don't use judgment, if you will.
mm, mm.
And that is a big problem. I don't think we are going to counteract this so much only with
Education, by education.
education. I think it would have to be
Okay.
a cocktail of measures through education, through indirect influence, using the closed circle, through a combination of mandates from the law, from etc., from local regulations, and it's the combination of those measures that would contribute to reaching the public health goals. But and to conclude on this one, if you look at the anti-vaccine sentiment, it is as old as vaccines. I mean, you find evidence of the anti-vaccine sentiment in the UK, for instance, when there were some in the early immunization against smallpox, using cowpox as the active. So the anti-vaccine sentiment has always existed, more or less. It's just becoming more visible and more vocal with the social network. I think, honestly, the big tech giants, like the Facebooks and the Twitter,
Yes. Yes.
they should be held to account. Their role is to purge
Definitely.
their streams from all the bullshit that is in there, because this
Definitely.
is extremely noxious.
Definitely, definitely, especially because it's a great case in public health right now,
Absolutely,
and this can save
absolutely.
humanity.
And I think this is where the states collectively,
Mm.
have a role to play, is to impose fines on those big companies
Yes,
until they clean their act.
yes, sure, sure, definitely. That's a very important point, definitely.